forget. Okay, and we are at 1:30 Pacific time. So I'll go ahead and get started. I know we'll probably have some folks joining in. I'm Elizabeth Borghi, and I'm excited to be here today to talk to you about Wholehearted Hypergrowth, scaling up in Silicon Valley. If you have been using any social media hashtags for the conference, it is hashtag Library 2020 and hashtag Wholehearted Libraries. And we're here today with our founding partner, San Jose State University School of Information. Just a little bit about me. First of all, it's great to be back for another Library 2.0 conference. I spoke at one in 2014 when we had a very different format, but I always love these opportunities to get to meet with everybody from all around the world who share a passion and interest in providing the very best experiences for our users, whether we're finding them in a medical library, a public library, or Silicon Valley. So about me, I do have librarian experience. I did graduate from San Jose State. I was president of the ALA student chapter there and have worked both as a public and academic librarian. But then in around 2013, I found my calling as a knowledge manager and have found myself working in tech environments for that time period. I'm currently a knowledge program manager at LinkedIn. And I always bring my librarian experience to everything I do. And I think one of my very favorite topics is bringing all of the things we love about librarianship into non-traditional environments. A little bit about me that I think informs today's presentation is that I'm from Detroit originally, and I spent a few years working in the automotive industry, which is a very different world than libraries and a very different world from tech. It was a very orthodox culture. It was the kind of place where if as a female you were at work and you weren't wearing pantyhose, you would be sent home until you could dress differently. I like to tell that story to a lot of my colleagues who are allowed to really bring their full selves to work sometimes as sort of a funny anecdote to how much things change. But we have all probably had experience working in conservative environments. And I vowed to never be that person. If I could build a culture and build a place I want to work, how can I build a human workplace? So that's what we're going to talk about today. I will spend some time talking about one of my previous employers. So all of those thoughts and opinions are my own, but I'm excited because I rarely get to spend a lot of time talking about the soft skills and cultural pieces of how we make our programs successful. I spend a lot of time on the tactical and the operational and the strategic, but no matter if you have the best platform and the best intelligence, without the soft skills, you may end up working in an environment you don't want to be at, and your team's success is going to be hindered. So soft skills are really, really important. We'll do a little bit of a case study into my experiences at a hypergrowth startup based in Palo Alto, California. I joined in 2018 when the company was just about 70 employees, and we were based in one location in Palo Alto. And we knew we were growing and we were really successful, but we thought for the time being, we're just going to be in Palo Alto. As fate and fortune would have it, we actually ended up receiving our Series B funding, which meant that we were tasked with going global and going global immediately. So we suddenly knew we had to expand and grow the business. Today, the company is over, I think now over 1,200 employees in 9 offices in 4 countries. What you see here is on the left, the day we received that Series B, and on the right is sort of some of the working conditions we're working in as a very scrappy disruptor, all hands on deck, trying to make things happen. It was a very exciting time, and I always used to say that we were building the runway while the plane was taking off. I started as a knowledge manager, but once we received the Series B funding, we realized we needed to get a training program in place because we needed to recruit, hire, and onboard 20 to 30 employees per month. A minimum. Ideally, we would get to 40. And we needed to do this in locations where we didn't even have real estate yet. And we needed to be able to get the support agents on the floor and ready for business very quickly because our growth was phenomenal and we almost couldn't keep up with all of our customers. And so our goal was to get everybody in the door and on the floor in 2 weeks. How do we do that too while keeping our culture intact, thriving globally at scale? I think the culture piece was, even though it's a soft skill, it was very widely recognized by our leadership that this was critical to the success of the company. I don't think any startup wants a sort of growth at any cost approach. You know, you want to know that the company is going to be successful, and you want to know that people are going to be happy to show up every day. So we knew that culture was going to be really critical as we're building new offices and new departments. Ultimately, what we delivered was a full onboarding and training experience. When we began, there was no IT department, there was no HR department. So it was very, very, very lean team. A lot of people wearing a lot of different hats. We had over 60 employees that we onboarded in 4 global locations. And ultimately what we delivered was a 2-week-long training program with everything that goes into a training program. So that's the curriculum, the learning objectives, the learning materials, course evaluations, as well as exams for our new hires. And pretty much we had a new hire class every 2 weeks. And so twice a month we were onboarding 2 new groups of new hires. And we needed to maintain a very high CSAT of above 94%, make sure that our support agents were proficient in the tools and in the industry knowledge they needed to succeed in their roles. And we would also evaluate the course based on their CSAT, their proficiency, and course evaluations that we would have them submit. So we were delivering the whole enchilada, and we got it up and running really, really fast. Now, how did we really do that? I won't talk about all of the nuts and bolts that went into that because that's another presentation for another day. But I knew that in terms of soft skills, we wouldn't be able to accomplish what we needed to without some of these, without these 3 key components you see here, which is empathy, a curiosity and growth mindset, and radical trust. I tend to go about a lot that I do with this quote from Rumi in my mind, which is, wherever you stand, be the soul of that place. And I think back to those days where I was working in the automotive industry in Detroit. And the idea was sort of, you put on your work uniform, you leave your whole self at home, you come to work, you perform, you kind of go through the motions. And then when you clock out, you can go back to being your real self. I'm really glad that I didn't settle for that. I'm really glad that I moved to California and discovered libraries and discovered startup culture and a lot of other revolutionary, I think it's revolutionary thinking around how to show up to a human workplace and be your full authentic self. These days, many organizations have not just diversity teams, but diversity, inclusion, and belonging. So it's very important in a lot of workplaces today. But empathy is always where I start. So literally on the first day of new hire training, we would have what you could call empathy exercises, where we would walk through with our new hires What do you think the customer's mindset is right now? What do you think they're going through? They're a business traveler. They're contacting you on their mobile phone because their flight has been canceled or they can't get into their hotel room. Let's walk through that and put ourselves in their shoes. And let's also be empathetic with one another, because what we're doing has never been done before. This is an entirely new approach to this industry. We're doing great, but we're also figuring it out every day. So we have to be mindful, we have to be compassionate, we have to be patient, and have each other's back, because all day long we're dealing with customers who are probably in some difficult circumstances, or else they wouldn't be chatting into us. And how can we support one another? And it's part of everything we do. User experience. So if you talk more about the practical applications, when we think about empathy in a workplace, it also comes down to the user experience, saving our users time and effort, delivering what they need as close and as seamlessly as possible. Whether we're delivering that through an application, a platform. Later on, when I switched gears back into my knowledge management role, I thought about the knowledge base our support agents were using and how I could eliminate clicks and scrolling, because every second they spend looking for information is another second that our customer is on the other end of the line, whether it's a chat or a phone call, waiting for a response. So empathy and usability is absolutely the lens that we should look at everything through, because that's really ultimately, at the end of the day, the only thing that matters. I also would emphasize that, hey, this is a brand new office. You know, we're some of the first employees here. In multiple cases, like in our Dallas support center, and in Amsterdam, our EMEA support center, it was the first office and the very first people we hired. So we're seeding and establishing that culture from day one. And on day one, I'd say, let's make this a place we all want to show up and be every day. We're playing a very active role in building this culture. So let's collaborate. Let's talk about it. Let's whiteboard it. Let's work on it together. The company did have its own values, but also how do we, live out those values in the day to day? And I'm really not talking about things like, sometimes people think about culture in Silicon Valley and they're like, oh, snacks and ping pong tables and beanbag chairs. And I'm not talking about that at all. I'm really talking about how we show up in a very human way, and how we treat one another and how we perform in sort of uncertain circumstances. The other key elements are curiosity and growth. So I do have experience with learning and development, instructional design, and training. And so it was also really key to me that even after the classroom time ends, that we have a culture of curiosity and growth. So how are we supporting our employees with a learning environment? Knowing that the company is growing in leaps and bounds, and that there's some opportunities today or that aren't here today, but we know are probably going to be a full job or a full department in a few months' time. So how do we start making those connections as things are growing? We would do that through things like part-time job shadowing, very informal mentorship opportunities. It could be literally just going for a walk with somebody or having coffee with somebody that's in an area that you find interesting. A lot of our support agents were, I would say, earlier in their career and were open to new opportunities. Maybe they didn't have the clearest sense what that was. Because I had interviewed many of them, been in a training classroom with them, I had a pretty good pulse on where they wanted to go and what they wanted to do. And so it wasn't part of my job, but because I do enjoy mentorship and because I've had so many fabulous mentors in my career, always kept my eyes and ears open for opportunities where I felt like somebody's strengths could be leveraged more as the company grew. So that was something that was always top of mind, and just making sure that we're providing opportunities for exposure to other parts of the business. And I also had a lending library, so I can never get too far away from that. And that included books on career development, personal development, soft skills, user experience, customer service, travel, and just hope that, we're building opportunities for people to have sort of what I call serendipitous learning at every opportunity possible. And then all of this is not possible without radical trust. So when you're working in a hypergrowth startup, I used to refer to it as dog years. I can also say from experience that the challenges and business strides we would make in a month are almost what you would experience in 6 to 12 months in many more, mature, established companies. Because of that, mistakes are inevitable. I almost hesitate to call some things mistakes. Some of it is just what happens when you are building the runway while the plane is taking off. So I would say, let's fail forward. And what I mean by that is we're going to make mistakes, but we're going to learn from it. And we're going to take those learnings and we're going to see how we can prevent it from happening again, whether that's building it into a training or building it into our product or a process, making sure that we're improving as we're learning. And I promise you, this was the contract I basically had, is I'm here to help you succeed. I want to get the roadblocks out of your way. I'm here to listen and see and observe because, again, we're all learning in real time. And in return, I ask that you show up and you give 100%. And if we can both do that for one another, and if we can give one another feedback while we're going about this amazing journey, which in many cases is a once-in-a-lifetime experience, then we know we're going to be growing individually, we're going to be growing professionally, and we're going to be improving the product and improving the customer experience. So everybody wins. Radical trust is actually something that I first encountered with Dr. Michael Stevens in the Hyperlinked Library course, which was one of the last courses I took before graduating from the program. Which at that time was SLIS, the School of Library and Information Science. And it was probably one of the best courses I could have taken before entering my professional career, because it really brought forth a lot of the core values that I think we're covering in the course of today's conference, which is we're all in it together. How do we bring our hearts? How do we bring our whole selves to empower one another and help one another succeed? So really, we're all in it together. And that is all I have for today. It's a very high-level overview of some of the takeaways from working in a hypergrowth organization, but I would love to answer any questions any of you might have.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. There is a question in the chat. They said, I would be interested to know if many startups have embedded library services. And before you answer that, if anybody else has questions, please put them in chat and we'll make sure that Elizabeth gets to them.
Great. I love that question. I don't think many startups do. I still consider any tech organization, especially a startup, to be a little progressive if they realize that they have a need for that. I tend to think of my wheelhouse as being communication. I've worked a lot on internal communications, which is something that is so critical when a company is growing and everyone's kind of running in 20 different directions at once. How do you harness that and isolate what people really need to know from sort of the sound? So I'm always trying to boost the signal in the industry and say, hey, that was in fact my first Library 2.0 session was everybody needs a librarian. And I think once they have a librarian on site, they're like, oh my gosh, where has this person been all this time?
Thank you. Any other questions? Please put them in chat. Do you find that the new hires have the sense of the need for soft skills Um, and how does that come about in the training?
Definitely. In fact, when we were interviewing, we had a very special approach to interviewing because we knew at that time, because we had gone from like 10 people, less than 10 people in one office, there wasn't a lot documented. There was really not a lot of process. It was sort of like shoulder tapping and tribal knowledge. So we would screen for adaptability, the ability to thrive in basically chaotic environments, and people who did have an openness to not knowing, which understandably can be very triggering. It can make you feel very uncomfortable. A lot of times we want to know exactly how to perform in our roles. So it was a big part of the screening process to hire people that had those basic skills in place and that sort of agility. But then we definitely enforced it through exercises and through training practices as new hires, and modeling too, because a lot of us are sponges. We kind of, especially in a startup where things are kind of chaos, look at our leaders to model how exactly we should interact with one another.
Thank you. Are your interviews, or when you were doing them, face to face, or did you do them online?
Most of them were face to face. Most of them, even if it started out with a phone component, we would then do interviews on site at whatever the location we were going to be hiring at was.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Last call for questions in the chat. And while we're waiting to see, oh, here we have one. Can you see them, or do you want me to read it to you?
Yeah, read it to me, please.
How would you recommend dealing with the negative connotations surrounding being a, in quotes, scrappy disruptor? For example, many library cultures seem rather reluctant, being rather change averse and wholeheartedly embracing emerging trends and technologies in the industry.
That is a great question. And I certainly have experienced that firsthand as well as libraries that were eager to embrace digital. So what I would say is I do run into similar challenges, even in non-library environments. People, by nature, most of us are uncomfortable with change. And I think anyone who finds themselves in a library or information professional role at this time will find themselves having to do a fair degree of change management. And I would say that even working at tech startups, change management is a part of my daily work. So what I usually look for is how to tie in to either the aspirations or the business needs or the pain points or frustrations of the person that I am trying to show the value of this program. So in my world, a lot of times that comes down to saving time, effort, money. I think that that is still, applicable in the library world as well, because you don't have people giving you millions of dollars in one fell swoop the way startups do. So it really does still come down to that user experience, and users are used to a specific consumer experience these days that I know libraries are striving to deliver to them. I think trying to talk about the impact of that on revenue, on funding, on library visits, on building the collection, being able to offer more services, tying it to the bottom line is very important. And even when we seem to have plenty of funding in the startup world, I always do tie it to the soft components, qualitative pieces, as well as the quantitative. This is how much time or money you could save or earn.
Thank you. Another question here. You mentioned exposure to new opportunities and curiosity and growth. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, definitely. So as somebody in leadership, have a good feel for the roadmap of how the business is going to unfold, let's say over the course of the next quarter. And also I have worked in business operations functions previously. So I tend to have a feel for, okay, maybe this business unit doesn't exist today, but when we get to X employees or X customers, this is something we're going to need. So in interviewing people, you understand, are they someone who enjoys tools and systems and technology? Are they a process heavy individual? Are they someone that's very concerned with quality? Or do you see, or are they very people centric? Maybe they would want to go into recruiting. And so I think just having a sort of like a system-wide sense of how the business runs, and also being in meetings and having an awareness into what headcount is going to be opened up, enables me to have a good knowing if this is going to be a potential. But even if I don't have that insight, I'll just, in the course of my sort of unofficial mentoring sessions, which could very often were a walk around the block or a cup of coffee, talking to people about where they want to grow and saying, hey, have you ever considered this? And then talking to them about why I think they might be a good fit for that and see if it resonates with them. And just really starting it out with, very organic, casual conversations.
Thank you. Okay, we're almost at the end of our time, so I'll stay on here for another couple seconds in case there's any last question. But in case there isn't, thank you so much. This was really helpful, a great audience, a great presentation. And thank you for being such a fabulous graduate of our program.
Thank you, Sue. And thank you for being such a great classroom presenter, assistant today. And everybody, thank you for attending and for all of the great questions. Good thinking, and definitely appreciate having some time with you here today.
Oh, wait, one last little question. How about taking those other skills and applying them to your current workspace?
Yes, and actually, so if that's sort of in reference to the last question, definitely. So if somebody does have an interest in pursuing an area, and we weren't always ready to just be like, okay, here, move on over to a new role. So it was more, it was definitely not structured. So we didn't have formal career pathways or tracks, but it would be like, hey, there's this project going on. Would you like to try a hand at developing some materials for this? And let's just see how it goes. So yes, it was very, very casual, exactly like that in many cases. Let's just kind of give this a try and see how it goes.
Perfect. Thank you. I just want to remind everybody that all of these sessions are going to be on YouTube, so that if you missed things in this session or other concurrent sessions, you'll be able to get them there. So thank you again, Elizabeth. We really appreciate your time. And thank you for
so
being
much.
such great participants.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.